seas, battles fought in silence, in whispers, in manipulation hidden behind smiles, and there are wounds so deep that even heaven watches in grief. You wondered why the person you loved became distant, why their voice changed, why their heart turned cold while yours stayed loyal. You blamed yourself. You questioned your worth. You replayed every conversation in the darkness, asking, "What did I do wrong?" But heaven says, you were not abandoned because you lacked value. You were targeted because your love carried light. There are people who enter lives not to heal them, and to poison what they cannot create. The woman who turned your person against you did not arrive with horns and fire. No darkness rarely announces itself. It came disguised as comfort, as understanding, as attention during weakness, as poison poured slowly into wounded ears, and the person you loved became confused, pulled between truth and illusion, between loyalty and temptation, between peace and emotional chaos. You watched them drift like a ship leaving the shore while you stood helpless on the sand, and it broke you. You cried where nobody could hear. You carried humiliation in silence. You smiled in public while your soul collapsed in private. But hear this clearly. God does not sleep through betrayal. Every tear has a witness. Every manipulation has a consequence. Every false tongue eventually chokes on its own deception. For a season, it looked like evil was winning. It looked like lies were stronger than sincerity. It looked like the one who destroyed your peace was flourishing. But appearances deceive, because while you were healing in hidden places, she was entering a storm she never prepared for. There is a pain that comes when a soul builds its happiness on the destruction of another, a deep pain, a hollow pain, a spiritual emptiness no attention can silence, and now the very chaos she released into your life has returned to her own doorstep. The sleepless nights, the confusion, the emotional torment, the heaviness that money cannot remove and people cannot fix. Why? Because whatever is planted in darkness eventually blooms in sorrow. God is not mocked. The same manipulation used to steal affection now poisons her own peace. The same games once used against you consume her mind. The same fire she lit for another now burns within her own walls. And while this unfolds, God is speaking to you. Do not celebrate her suffering. That is not your calling. Pain changes nothing if bitterness becomes your new master. Instead, rise above it, because the greatest revenge is not destruction. It is restoration. The greatest victory is becoming whole after they tried to break you. You see, some people thought your kindness was weakness. Your patience was desperation. Your silence was defeat. But heaven says, you survived what was designed to destroy you. You walked through rejection and still kept your heart alive. You endured betrayal and still did not become cruel. You carried grief and still spoke with compassion. That is strength, and now God is rebuilding you in places no human hand can touch. The nights that once drowned you in sorrow are becoming nights of wisdom. The tears that once fell in loneliness are watering the ground of your future. You are changing, not into someone harder, into someone deeper. There is a sacred power born from surviving heartbreak without losing your soul. And one day the person who walked away may finally see clearly, not through manipulation, not through emotional control, but through painful awakening. They may realize too late who truly loved them, who truly prayed for them, who truly stood faithful while others played games with emotions. But whether they return or not, your destiny does not end in abandonment. God is leading you toward peace that does not depend on another person's confusion, toward love that does not require begging, toward relationships untouched by manipulation, toward purpose greater than your pain. Listen carefully. Some endings are not punishment. They are rescue. Some separations are heaven pulling you away from a future disaster you could not yet see. And though your heart shattered, your spirit survived. That means God is not finished with you. So wipe your tears, not because your suffering was small, but because your future is still alive. The betrayal did not bury you. The rejection did not erase you. The manipulation did not cancel your calling. You are still chosen, still loved, still seen by heaven. And while others are drowning in the consequences of deception, God is preparing a table for your healing, your restoration, and your rise. Because what was meant to break you became the very thing that awakened your strength. Betrayal rarely enters through the front door looking dangerous. It does not arrive wearing the face of an enemy. Most of the time, it comes wrapped in warmth, carrying the appearance of understanding, kindness, and emotional safety. That is why so many souls never recognize the danger until the damage has already reached the heart. The most painful betrayals are not sudden attacks from strangers. They are slow invasions carried out by people who learned how to sit close enough to study weaknesses, emotions, loneliness, and unspoken frustrations. Manipulation is patient. It listens carefully. It watches silently. It learns where the cracks are before it ever applies pressure. There are people who know how to speak to wounded emotions with calculated tenderness. They know exactly when to appear. Usually, they arrive during moments of confusion, conflict, exhaustion, or emotional distance. They do not begin by destroying relationships. They begin by offering comfort. They become the voice that says, "I understand you." They become the shoulder offered during vulnerable moments. They become the listener when communication inside the relationship has weakened. What appears harmless at first slowly becomes dangerous because emotional dependence begins to form quietly beneath the surface. The frightening thing about emotional manipulation is that it often feels good in the beginning. That is why people fall into it so easily. A manipulated person rarely believes they are being manipulated. They believe they are finally being heard, finally being valued, finally being seen. The manipulator creates an atmosphere where trust develops quickly and emotional boundaries slowly disappear. One conversation becomes many. Small complaints become deep confessions. Innocent attention becomes emotional attachment. And before long, the manipulator is no longer simply present in the person's life. They are influencing the way they think, feel, judge, and respond. This is how division begins. Not with explosions, but with whispers. A seed is planted carefully. A subtle criticism. A quiet suggestion. A question designed to create doubt. Are you sure they really care about you? You deserve better. I would never treat you that way. These statements seem small, but manipulation feeds on repetition. The human mind is deeply affected by what it hears consistently, especially during emotional weakness. Slowly, perception changes. Loyalty weakens. Trust becomes unstable. A once clear heart becomes confused. Many people do not realize how powerful emotional influence truly is. A person can be turned against someone they once deeply loved if the manipulation is persistent enough. Human emotions are fragile when they are neglected, wounded, or exhausted. The manipulator studies this fragility carefully. They know when to comfort, when to flatter, when to sympathize, and when to create division. They know how to appear innocent while quietly pulling relationships apart from behind the curtain. And what makes this betrayal even more painful is that the victim often watches the transformation happen in confusion. They notice the distance growing. Conversations become colder. Affection becomes inconsistent. The connection that once felt natural suddenly feels strained and unfamiliar. They begin questioning themselves. They wonder whether they failed, whether they became unworthy, whether they somehow caused the change. They replay memories endlessly, trying to understand where everything started falling apart. But manipulation is designed to hide its fingerprints. The true influence often remains invisible until the relationship has already been deeply damaged. There is also a spiritual exhaustion attached to betrayal through manipulation. It drains the soul because it creates emotional warfare filled with uncertainty. Direct conflict can sometimes be easier to process because at least the enemy stands openly in front of you. But manipulation creates fog. It creates emotional confusion where nothing feels stable anymore. The victim senses something is wrong, but cannot fully explain it. They feel replaced, emotionally abandoned, and psychologically destabilized all at once. Some manipulators operate through attention. Others operate through pity. Others through admiration, flirtation, emotional rescue, or constant validation. But the goal is often the same: gain emotional control. Once emotional control is achieved, influence becomes powerful. The manipulator slowly becomes the voice that carries the most emotional weight in the other person's mind. Their opinions matter more. Their approval matters more. Their perspective begins replacing truth itself. This is why betrayal, disguised as comfort, becomes so devastating. The person being influenced may genuinely believe they are making independent decisions, while their emotions are being shaped behind the scenes. They may defend the manipulator passionately because emotional dependence has blinded their discernment. And the more attached they become to the manipulator's validation, the more distant they often become from the people who truly loved them with sincerity. There are moments when manipulation becomes so deep that the victim of betrayal feels completely powerless. They watch someone they once knew become almost unrecognizable. The emotional connection weakens while the manipulator's influence grows stronger. It feels like losing someone while they are still physically alive. That kind of grief is difficult to explain because it carries confusion, heartbreak, rejection, and helplessness at the same time. Yet one of the most dangerous mistakes people make is underestimating how destructive emotional influence can become over time. Manipulation does not always destroy immediately. Sometimes it slowly poisons trust month after month, conversation after conversation, until relationships collapse under the weight of accumulated doubt and emotional distortion. There are tears that never touch the attention of the world, tears that fall in silence, behind closed doors, where no audience exists to offer comfort or understanding. Some people carry heartbreak quietly, learning how to smile in public while collapsing internally in private places no one else can reach. Human beings often overlook hidden suffering, because the world pays attention to visible wounds more than invisible ones. But heaven does not operate with human blindness. God sees the pain buried beneath silence. He notices the sorrow hidden behind restrained voices, tired eyes, and forced laughter. Nothing escapes his awareness. Many people believe their suffering has gone unnoticed, simply because no human hand reached for them during their darkest moments. They interpret silence around them as abandonment. They assume their tears disappeared into emptiness because no one acknowledged them. But there is a difference between being unseen by people and being unseen by God. Human attention is limited, distracted, and temporary. Divine awareness is constant. Every cry whispered into a pillow at midnight, every trembling prayer spoken through grief, every silent breakdown hidden from family and friends has already been witnessed in full detail by heaven. There are moments when pain becomes so heavy that words can no longer carry it. A person stops explaining because exhaustion replaces expression. They become quiet, not because they no longer feel deeply, but because the depth of the wound cannot easily be translated into language. Some burdens are carried in silence, because explaining them repeatedly only deepens the ache. Yet even in those wordless moments, God understands completely. He does not require polished speeches to recognize suffering. He reads what exists beneath human language. He sees the ache behind the calm face. He sees the fear hidden behind strength. He sees the loneliness concealed behind independence. People often misunderstand silent pain because silence itself can appear deceptive. Someone may continue functioning, continue working, continue speaking normally while internally fighting emotional battles that consume their energy every single day. There are souls walking through life carrying rejection, betrayal, disappointment, anxiety, grief, and emotional exhaustion while still fulfilling responsibilities expected of them. Others assume they are fine simply because they continue moving forward. But survival does not always mean peace exists inside the heart. God pays attention to the hidden places people overlook. The world celebrates public victories, visible success, and outward confidence, but heaven also watches private suffering. It notices the moments when a person almost gave up, but chose to keep going. It notices when someone fights bitterness despite being deeply wounded. It notices when someone remains kind after being mistreated. These invisible battles carry enormous spiritual weight, even though human beings rarely recognize them. Every act of deception also stands fully exposed before God. Nothing manipulative remains permanently hidden. Human beings may conceal intentions from each other, but they cannot conceal motives from heaven. People can wear masks successfully before society while carrying corruption internally. But divine sight penetrates appearances completely. God sees every lie wrapped in charm. He sees every manipulation disguised as concern. He sees every betrayal hidden behind smiles and carefully crafted words. There are individuals who become skilled at deceiving others emotionally. They know how to perform innocence while secretly causing damage. They know how to distort truth, shift blame, create confusion, and maintain an image that protects them from accountability. Sometimes they appear convincing even to those closest to them. Their words sound sincere. Their behavior appears harmless, but God sees the intention operating underneath their actions. He sees what others cannot detect. This truth becomes especially important for wounded people who feel powerless after betrayal. Many struggle because the person who harmed them continues living comfortably while they themselves carry emotional scars. They wonder why justice seems delayed. They question whether truth matters at all when deception appears successful. But divine timing does not function according to human impatience. Just because consequences are not immediate does not mean heaven ignored the offense. There is a dangerous illusion people fall into when they believe secrecy protects wrongdoing. They assume hidden actions carry no weight if nobody discovers them. But hidden things are not hidden from God simply because they are hidden from people. Every conversation spoken behind closed doors, every manipulative intention, every act designed to wound another soul while preserving outward appearances is already fully known in heaven. This awareness should both comfort and challenge the human heart. It comforts the wounded because it means their suffering has not disappeared into emptiness. Their tears matter, their pain matters, their emotional battles matter. Even when they feel isolated, abandoned, or forgotten by people, they remain fully visible before God. At the same time, it challenges every soul because no one escapes divine awareness. Every motive, every secret intention, every private action eventually stands exposed before eternal truth. There are people who spend years carrying hidden grief while asking God whether He notices their struggle at all. They pray through tears, wondering whether heaven has grown silent toward them. Yet silence does not mean absence. Some of the deepest spiritual work occurs in seasons where external evidence feels invisible. God often remains closest during moments when people feel most abandoned. The wounded heart may not always sense His presence emotionally, but divine awareness never withdraws from human suffering. God also understands the kind of pain people cannot fully explain to others. There are betrayals so confusing that language fails. There are emotional wounds so personal that speaking about them feels impossible. Some people suffer quietly because they fear being misunderstood. Others remain silent because they are tired of repeating their pain to those who minimize it. But heaven does not minimize hidden sorrow. God listens carefully even to unspoken grief. Many hearts continue breaking silently while the world moves around them, unaware. Yet every hidden tear still carries significance before God, and every act of deception still stands uncovered beneath divine sight. There are people who build their happiness on the destruction of another person's peace. They believe that if they can steal affection, manipulate emotions, or create division successfully, they will finally feel powerful, fulfilled, or victorious. In the beginning, it often appears as though they succeeded. They smile publicly while someone else cries privately. They enjoy temporary attention while another soul struggles to recover from betrayal. From the outside, it may even seem unfair that the one who caused the damage walks away untouched, while the wounded person carries all the pain. But there is a truth many fail to understand. No human being escapes the consequences of the darkness they release into the lives of others. Pain created through selfishness has a way of returning to its source. Not always immediately, not always publicly, but deeply. There is a suffering that develops inside people who repeatedly violate trust, manipulate emotions, and injure hearts for personal gain. At first, they may silence their conscience with excitement, validation, attention, or temporary pleasure. They convince themselves they did nothing wrong. They justify betrayal by focusing only on what they wanted rather than what they destroyed. But the human soul was never designed to carry deception without consequence. Some consequences appear externally. Others begin internally long before anyone else notices. A person who repeatedly harms others emotionally slowly loses peace within themselves. Even if they continue smiling outwardly, something inside them begins to fracture. The soul cannot continuously participate in manipulation without becoming spiritually restless. Deep within, emptiness starts growing, rest becomes difficult, satisfaction becomes temporary, emotional chaos quietly increases. People often imagine consequences as dramatic punishment arriving suddenly from the sky. But many times the deepest pain emerges from within the heart itself. The manipulator eventually becomes trapped inside the atmosphere they created. The same distrust they used against others begins poisoning their own relationships. The same emotional games they once controlled begin controlling them. Fear enters their life because people who deceive others often become terrified of being deceived themselves. This creates an exhausting cycle. They constantly question loyalty because they themselves understand how easily loyalty can be broken. They become suspicious because they know the strategies of manipulation intimately. What once felt empowering slowly transforms into inner instability. Their relationships lose depth because authentic peace cannot survive where deception repeatedly lives. There is also a loneliness attached to selfish destruction. People who gain affection through manipulation often discover that stolen connections rarely produce genuine security. Relationships built on betrayal carry instability from the beginning. Deep inside, insecurity grows because the foundation itself was corrupted. If someone was willing to betray another person once, fear eventually whispers that betrayal may happen again. Trust becomes fragile. Anxiety increases. Emotional peace weakens. Some individuals ignore these inner consequences for years by distracting themselves constantly. They seek attention, validation, excitement, status, or control to avoid facing the emptiness growing within. But distractions cannot permanently silence the soul. There are quiet moments when everything catches up, moments late at night when silence becomes unavoidable, moments when guilt, regret, fear, and emotional exhaustion begin rising to the surface. The painful reality is that selfish victories rarely satisfy the heart for long. A person may temporarily enjoy feeling chosen, desired, or powerful after interfering in someone else's relationship or emotional stability. But eventually they confront a terrifying emptiness because destruction cannot create lasting fulfillment. Hurting others may feed the ego briefly, but it starves the soul over time. There are also spiritual consequences attached to emotional destruction. Human beings are deeply interconnected emotionally and spiritually. When someone intentionally wounds another person for selfish gain, they release chaos not only into another life, but into their own spirit as well. Darkness spreads inward, compassion weakens, genuine peace becomes harder to access. The conscience slowly becomes burdened beneath accumulated damage. Some people reach a point where they no longer recognize themselves internally. Outwardly, they continue functioning, socializing, and appearing confident, but inwardly, they feel emotionally hollow. Relationships become transactional rather than meaningful. Validation becomes addictive. because inner emptiness constantly demands external reinforcement. Yet no amount of attention fully satisfies them because the issue exists deeper than external circumstances. What many wounded people fail to realize is that the person who caused their suffering may already be carrying hidden torment invisible to others. Public appearances often conceal private pain. Someone can look successful while emotionally collapsing internally. The consequences of manipulation do not always appear dramatically on the outside at first. Sometimes they emerge as anxiety, restlessness, emotional instability, distrust, bitterness, or profound loneliness hidden beneath carefully maintained appearances. Eventually, many manipulators experience the same emotional wounds they once created in others. This does not happen by accident. Human behavior has a way of reproducing itself. The chaos people release often circles back into their own lives through broken trust, unstable relationships, betrayal, emotional confusion, and loss. The very patterns they once used against others begin appearing around them. There is a deep pain in realizing too late that selfish actions destroyed something pure. Some individuals eventually awaken to the damage they caused. After the excitement fades and reality settles in, they begin seeing the sincerity they took for granted. They recognize the loyalty they replaced. They understand the peace they disrupted. But by then, regret itself becomes its own punishment. Regret can haunt the soul heavily because it forces people to confront truths they previously avoided. They remember conversations they manipulated, emotions they exploited, trust they shattered, and hearts they wounded carelessly. Some spend years attempting to outrun that awareness through distraction, denial, or pride, but unresolved guilt has a way of resurfacing repeatedly. There is no true victory in gaining happiness through another person's suffering, because destruction always leaves residue inside the one creating it. The soul absorbs the weight of its own actions, and eventually the emotional debt begins demanding payment through inner pain, instability, emptiness, fear, and sorrow.